Receipts up, hype down, let's lock in. This is your Mega AI Roundup covering the biggest official drops from Saturday, May 3rd, 2026 through today, Wednesday, May 7th, 2026. And this was not one of those slow weeks where everybody is stretching a tiny feature into a giant headline. This week actually moved. OpenAI shipped new real-time voice models in the API, rolled out a new safety feature inside ChatGPT, upgraded its default everyday model, expanded the ad business, and then basically published a business scoreboard showing which companies are already separating from the pack in enterprise AI use. Google answered from a different direction, pushing multimodal file search for more verifiable RAG, then updating AI mode and AI overviews to steer people toward more original web sources. Anthropic made a strong enterprise play with a brand new services company. Microsoft made the case that the operating model of work is changing around agents, while also expanding formal evaluation partnerships with public sector AI testing bodies. And NVIDIA did what NVIDIA keeps doing in 2026, which is remind everybody that once models get serious, the story becomes chips, networks, power, and who can actually run the thing at industrial scale. So here is the game plan for this video. We are not just listing stories. We are going to connect them. What changed, why it matters, where the business model is heading, what it says about agentic workflows, and why this whole week still points back to one brutal reality. Capability is rising faster than available compute. If you like long-form AI briefings with on-screen citations instead of mystery screenshots and vibes, hit subscribe, like the video, and stay with me because this one has a lot to unpack. Before we zoom into individual stories, I want to frame the week correctly because the pattern matters more than any single headline. A lot of people still talk about AI as if there is one race. Who has the smartest chatbot? That is way too shallow now. This week shows at least 4 races running at the same time. Race number 1 is product quality at scale. That is where OpenAI's GPT-5.5 Instant story lands. The default assistant has to be a little smarter, more concise, and more personalized because hundreds of millions of people are living in that product every day. Race number 2 is monetization. That is where the ChatGPT adds expansion matters. If free usage keeps growing, somebody has to pay for inference, and OpenAI is showing one answer. Race number 3 is enterprise maturity. That is where OpenAI's B2B signals, Microsoft's frontier firm's framing, Anthropic's new services company, and NVIDIA plus ServiceNow all converge. The future of AI at work is not a clever sidebar assistant. It is delegated workflows, agent execution, evaluation, and governance. Race number 4 is infrastructure, and this is the hard wall everything runs into. OpenAI is building compute infrastructure for what it calls the intelligence age. NVIDIA is tying AI directly to energy abundance. Even when a company announces a software feature, the subtext is still compute. Can it scale? Can it stay cheap enough? Can it be trusted with harder tasks? Can it run with low enough latency to feel natural? So the reason this week is worth a mega video is that the stories reinforce each other. Better models create more usage. More usage creates pressure for monetization. Serious business use creates pressure for governance. Governance and autonomy create pressure for evaluation. And all of that lands on a finite supply of chips, memory, power, and networking. Keep that loop in mind because every story we cover plugs back into it. Let's start with what I think is one of the most strategically important drops of the week. OpenAI's new voice stack in the API on May 7th, 2026. The headline is simple, but the implications are bigger than they look. OpenAI introduced three new audio models. GPT Realtime 2 is the flagship because it is framed as the first voice model with GPT-5 class reasoning. That wording matters. It means OpenAI is not pitching voice as a thin speech wrapper around a weaker model. They are pitching voice as a serious interface for more demanding tasks. Then there is GPT Real-Time Translate, which is designed for live multilingual voice experiences and is described as handling more than 70 input languages into 13 output languages while keeping pace with the speaker. And then there is GPT Real-Time Whisper, a streaming transcription model aimed at low-latency speech to text. So why should you care? Because this is the clearest signal, yet that voice is moving from novelty to operating system layer. If a model can reason well enough while you speak, transcribe reliably, and translate on the fly, then voice stops being a gimmick and starts becoming a competitive interface for customer support, field operations, sales tooling, accessibility, language learning, internal enterprise copilots, and real-time assistants. It also lines up with a wider pattern across the industry. Companies do not just want better text generation. They want interfaces that reduce friction. Typing is friction. Copy-pasting is friction. Switching windows is friction. A voice model that can stay in the loop, call tools, and carry context starts to erase some of that. The catch is the same one we keep seeing. The nicer the interface feels, the more people use it, and the more expensive the underlying compute story can become. Real-time is expensive. Low latency is expensive. Speech in and speech out at scale is expensive. So yes, this is a product story, but it is also a usage and infrastructure story. And it raises the stakes for everyone else shipping assistance this year. If you are building on top of AI and you are still treating voice like a side feature, this announcement is a warning shot. Still on May 7th, OpenAI also rolled out something that is very different in tone, but arguably just as important for the long-term shape of AI products. Trusted Contact in ChatGPT. According to OpenAI's announcement, this is an optional safety feature that allows adults to nominate a person they trust, like a friend, family member, or caregiver, who may be notified if automated systems and trained reviewers detect that the enrolled person may have discussed harming themselves in a way that indicates a serious safety concern. This is not a normal feature launch. It sits right at the intersection of product design, safety operations, privacy, and social expectations about what general-purpose AI systems are supposed to do when users bring deeply sensitive issues into the conversation. And there are at least two big ways to read it. The charitable read is that it is an example of frontier consumer AI products taking duty of care more seriously and trying to create a bridge from the model to real human support. The harder read is that the moment a product becomes emotionally or practically central to daily life, the company behind it will be expected to make increasingly complex judgment calls about intervention, escalation, reviewer involvement, and consent. So even if you are not focused on the self-harm prevention angle specifically, This story matters because it is a preview of the governance burden that comes with general-purpose AI becoming a real companion layer in people's lives. We are leaving the phase where companies could plausibly say this is just a neutral tool, and whatever happens in the chat is not really their domain. If millions of people use these systems for reflection, crisis, work, and decision support, then expectations change. And the feature is also a reminder that the frontier AI race is not only about capability gains. Safety features are becoming shipping product surfaces in their own right. That means every competitor has to think not just about what their model can do, but what obligations come with being present in the most personal parts of user behavior. So this may not be the loudest headline of the week, but in terms of what it says about where the category is headed, it is a very big one. Back on May 5th, OpenAI updated the default ChatGPT experience with GPT-5.5 Instant. On the surface, this is one of those product refresh stories that people can sleep on because it sounds incremental, smarter, clearer, more personalized. Fine. But the reason this is worth real attention is that the default model is where mass behavior changes. OpenAI explicitly framed Instant as the daily driver for hundreds of millions of people and said the update makes everyday interactions more dependable, more accurate, and more useful. That means even a small quality bump gets amplified across enormous usage volume. But there is another layer here that makes this more than a consumer product polish story. The system card for GPT 5.5 Instant says this is the first instant model OpenAI is treating as high capability in its cybersecurity and biological and chemical preparedness categories, with appropriate safeguards. That is a fascinating signal. It suggests the floor is rising. The everyday model is getting strong enough that even the default tier now lives in a more serious safety regime. If you zoom out, this is what model diffusion looks like in practice. Capabilities that once felt frontier migrate downward into the model people use for routine questions, summaries, emails, browsing, and work tasks. And when that happens, three things follow. First, user expectations go up fast because the default assistant feels better without asking anything extra from the user. Second, product risk goes up because the same model is now more capable in sensitive domains. Third, infrastructure demand goes up because better defaults generally produce more usage, longer sessions, and more trust in offloading real work. There is also a competitive angle. If OpenAI keeps making the default product more useful while rivals are still asking users to choose among confusing tiers, the simplest thing can win. People stay where the basic experience feels strong. So yes, GPT 5.5 Instant is a model update. But it is also a distribution story, a safety story, and a reminder that mass market AI improves one default swap at a time. Now let's talk about money, because a lot of AI commentary still treats monetization as an afterthought even though it shapes everything. On May 5th, OpenAI announced new ways to buy ChatGPT ads. The company said advertisers can create ads through partners or a new beta self-serve ads manager, and it introduced cost-per-click bidding plus expanded measurement tools. OpenAI also emphasized that the ad experience is built around its ads principles and remains clearly separate from ChatGPT's answers. That separation is going to be the key battleground. Because once ads become more operationally mature, The obvious question is whether the product can stay trusted while adding a commercial layer. OpenAI is clearly trying to thread the needle here. The company wants more businesses to participate, wants a broader ads platform over time, but also wants to avoid the perception that the assistant itself is being quietly bent around advertiser incentives. And you can see why this move is happening. Inference is expensive. Free and lower-tier products with massive usage have to be supported somehow. Subscriptions help, enterprise helps, API helps, but consumer monetization at scale is still one of the biggest unresolved questions in frontier AI. So this is not a side story. It is part of the business model of the category. There is also a deeper industry signal here. The more chat interfaces become destinations in their own right, the more they start to inherit the monetization questions that used to belong to search, social, and app stores. Who gets distribution? What can be measured? What counts as user intent? What contexts are too sensitive for ads? OpenAI is basically prototyping one answer in public. And for viewers who care about the user side, here is the practical takeaway. When you see ad infrastructure maturing, that means the company believes usage is not just growing, but stable enough and valuable enough to support an ecosystem around it. So this week was not just about smarter models. It was also about the reality that frontier AI is becoming a real media and commercial surface. On May 6th, OpenAI published one of the most quietly revealing documents of the week, B2B signals. If you care about enterprise AI adoption, this was the piece to read. OpenAI says frontier firms, meaning those at the 95th percentile of usage, now use 3.5 times as much intelligence per worker as typical firms, up from 2 times a year ago. That already tells you the gap is widening, not flattening. But the more interesting claim is that message volume explains only part of the advantage. According to OpenAI, much of the separation comes from richer and more complex AI use, and the biggest difference shows up in advanced tools. The company specifically says frontier firms send 16 times as many codex messages per worker as typical firms. That is a huge clue about where value is actually forming. It is not just about more people casually asking an assistant to rewrite email. The firms pulling away are using deeper workflows, more specialized tools, and more delegated task structures. In other words, they are moving from author mode to editor mode to director mode. And that connects cleanly with what Microsoft talked about this week too, which we will get to in a minute. The operating model of work is changing around agents and tool-using systems, not just around text generation. I also think this is the kind of story executives should pay more attention to than benchmark charts. Benchmarks are useful, but if you are trying to understand who is actually building advantage, the meaningful questions are different. Are teams using AI in more workflows? Are they trusting it with harder tasks? Are they integrating it with real tools? Are they building habits around it? OpenAI's answer is yes, and not evenly. Some firms are compounding. Others are still dabbling. So the B2B signals piece matters because it puts numbers behind the intuition that enterprise AI maturity is becoming uneven. And once that gap gets large enough, it becomes cultural as much as technical. The teams that learn to delegate well, review well, and integrate well will not just use more AI. They will work differently. Anthropic's big signal this week landed on May 4th, and it says a lot about where enterprise AI adoption really is. Anthropic announced the formation of a new AI services company with Blackstone, Hellman and Friedman, and Goldman Sachs. The stated goal is to work with mid-sized companies across sectors to bring Claude into important operations, with applied AI engineers from Anthropic working alongside the new firm's engineering team to identify high-impact use cases, build custom solutions, and support customers over time. Now pause on that. The headline is not just that Anthropic wants more enterprise business. Everybody wants that. The important part is the services wrapper. This is an admission, or maybe a recognition, that a lot of the market still cannot capture value from frontier models through self-serve access alone. Plenty of companies do not need another chat window. They need workflow redesign, integration, guardrails, implementation help, and somebody who can stay involved after the first demo. So this announcement is really about distribution and adoption friction. The winner in enterprise AI may not simply be the company with the best model. It may be the company that can make high-value deployment feel less risky and less chaotic. And Anthropic is not alone in thinking that way. OpenAI is talking increasingly like a full-stack enterprise platform company. Microsoft is turning agents into an operating model. NVIDIA is climbing the stack with software and execution layers around infrastructure. Anthropic's services company fits that same trend from a different angle. It also opens up a strategic question. How much of enterprise AI is going to become services heavy, at least in the near term? If that share is large, then there is more moat in implementation and customer intimacy than many people expected. In other words, this week was another reminder that the market is not just sorting by raw model scores. It is sorting by who can turn capability into durable customer outcomes. Google's strongest developer story this week came on May 5th with a major update to Gemini API File Search. The company announced 3 core upgrades: multimodal support, custom metadata filtering, and page-level citations. That combination is more interesting than it sounds because it is exactly the kind of feature bundle that makes retrieval-augmented generation less hand-wavy and more production-worthy. Multimodal support matters because enterprise knowledge is not just plain text. It lives in scanned documents, charts, images, tables, slide decks, mixed media. Metadata filtering matters because production systems need more control over what gets retrieved and why. And page-level citations matter because they make it easier to verify where a model got something and to present grounded answers back to the user. In other words, this is not the flashiest AI story of the week, but it is one of the most useful. A lot of enterprise AI value over the next year is going to come from systems that are not fully autonomous geniuses, but simply much better at finding, grounding, and explaining information inside an organization's own material. Google is leaning directly into that. It also lines up with a broader trend in the week. Verifiability is becoming a product feature. OpenAI is talking about enterprise maturity and more delegated workflows. Microsoft is talking about evaluation. Google is making a core retrieval tool more source-aware. Those are all versions of the same pressure. Users and companies will delegate more once they can inspect more. I also think this story matters for builders who are not giant enterprises. If you are shipping an app on top of the Gemini API, the fastest way to make your product feel smarter is often not a bigger model. It is better retrieval, better filtering, and cleaner citations. So this update is one of those deceptively practical stories that will probably outlast some of the louder launch day hype elsewhere. A day later, on May 6th, Google followed with a search story that feels like a direct answer to one of the biggest anxieties around generative search. In its official post on AI mode and AI overviews, Google said it is rolling out updates to help people find relevant websites, deep insights, and original content from across the web more easily. The new features include more direct links inside responses, relevant article suggestions, website previews, and pathways to personal perspectives and subscription content. That matters because one of the core critiques of AI search is that it can turn the open web into a hidden substrate under a machine-generated paragraph. Users get an answer. Publishers get less traffic, less credit, and less brand connection. Google's message here is basically, we hear that concern, and we are trying to make the generative layer a better guide to the web instead of a dead-end summary box. Whether it fully solves the tension is another question, but the direction is interesting. It suggests that even the companies pushing hardest into generative search know they need better mechanisms for source discovery and attribution. There is also a lesson here for the whole AI stack. If a system becomes more capable, it also becomes more obligated to show its homework in a way users can actually follow. That is why this story connects so naturally with Google's file search update. One is about building better grounded systems for developers. The other is about exposing more source pathways to end users in search. Same pressure, different surface. And strategically, it matters because if Google can make AI search feel both useful and web native, it is defending not just a feature, but the legitimacy of the broader search model in an AI era. Microsoft's most important conceptual post this week arrived on May 5th with its Frontier Firms argument. The company says software work has already been moving through 4 patterns of human-agent collaboration, and that those patterns are beginning to show up in other functions too. The 4 labels are author, editor, director, and orchestrator. Author means you produce the work and call on AI for help when needed. Editor means you set intent and revise what AI drafts. Director means you create a spec and hand off whole tasks for AI to execute in the background. Orchestrator means you design a system where multiple agents run in parallel across a workflow, flagging exceptions back to you. Honestly, that framing is one of the best shorthand models I have seen lately for explaining how AI changes work without getting mystical about it. And it pairs perfectly with OpenAI's B2B signals data from the same week. The firms pulling ahead are not merely using more prompts. They are moving down that ladder toward more delegated and more orchestrated work. Microsoft also emphasizes the organizational side: culture, manager behavior, skill building, incentives. That is another good corrective to the usual discourse. People love to ask which model is best, but in actual organizations, the more important question is whether people know how to use any of them effectively, safely, and repeatedly. A mediocre operating model can waste a great model. A strong operating model can extract a lot of value from an only very good model. So this is not just leadership jargon. It is a real map for how agentic work adoption might look over the next year. If you are watching the enterprise market, the thing to pay attention to is not whether every firm says the word agent. It is whether they are actually redesigning work around delegation, oversight, and exception handling. That is where Microsoft's argument has teeth. The other Microsoft story from May 5th is less flashy, but maybe more foundational over time. Microsoft announced new agreements with the Center for AI Standards and Innovation in the US and the AI Security Institute in the UK to advance the science of AI testing and evaluation. The company said the work includes collaborative testing of Microsoft's frontier models, assessment of safeguards, and efforts to mitigate national security and large-scale public safety risks. That matters for at least 3 reasons. First, it reinforces that evaluation is no longer a sidecar document you publish after a launch. It is becoming part of the product and policy stack. Second, it shows that frontier model companies increasingly need a public story for how claims about safety and robustness are tested outside purely internal processes. Third, it creates a competitive pressure on everybody else. As capabilities climb, it gets harder to say trust us. Our red team looked at it. Customers, governments, and the public are going to want more formal methods, more external relationships, and clearer language around what exactly was tested and what was not. This also connects to some of the other stories from the week in a useful way. OpenAI's Instant System card raised the safety posture of a default model. Google's File Search update improved grounding and citations. NVIDIA plus ServiceNow stressed safe enterprise agent execution. Different companies, different layers, same direction of travel. Trust mechanisms are being productized. And once that starts happening, evaluation itself becomes part of market competition. The company that can move fast and still demonstrate credible testing may earn deployment opportunities others cannot. So while this is not the kind of story that trends for 12 hours on X, it is exactly the kind of story that shapes who is allowed into regulated, high-stakes, and national-scale environments over the next few years. On May 5th, NVIDIA and ServiceNow announced new autonomous AI agents for enterprises. And this story is worth sitting with because it shows what a mature enterprise AI pitch sounds like in 2026. NVIDIA says the expanded collaboration spans the full stack, delivering specialized autonomous agents that are safe and easy to adopt, powered by accelerated computing, open models, domain-specific skills, secure agent execution software, workflow context from ServiceNow Action Fabric, and governance from ServiceNow AI Control Tower. That is a mouthful, but the reason it matters is that every part of the sentence solves a different enterprise objection. Safe and easy to adopt addresses risk. Accelerated computing addresses performance. Open models address flexibility and cost control. Domain-specific skills address usefulness. Secure execution addresses trust. Workflow context addresses integration. Governance addresses scale. This is what the full-stack framing looks like when you are selling into serious business environments. NVIDIA also used the post to emphasize economics, saying the Blackwell platform delivers more than 50 times greater token output per watt than Hopper and nearly 35 times lower cost per million tokens. Whether you take every vendor efficiency claim at face value or not, the point is obvious. Cost and throughput are now central product arguments, not just hardware footnotes. This partnership also lines up with the Microsoft and OpenAI stories from the week. The future enterprise assistant is not being sold as a clever chatbot anymore. It is being sold as a governed system of agents that can act across workflows. That means the market is moving beyond model selection toward execution design. Who has the context? Who has the permissions? Who reviews exceptions? Who absorbs the infrastructure cost? NVIDIA and ServiceNow are saying they want to own a large chunk of that answer. Now we get to what might be the deepest story of the week, even though it looks like an infrastructure niche at first glance. On May 7th, NVIDIA published a post around the Genesis mission featuring U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright and NVIDIA's Ian Buck. The framing was blunt. American leadership in AI runs through American leadership in energy. And the post ties that claim to NVIDIA's AI for Science initiative plus massive coming systems, including a 100,000 GPU Vera Rubin system called Solstice. This is where the conversation jumps from software hype to physical reality. We can talk all day about better reasoning, voice, agents, retrieval, and monetization, but all of it depends on actual electricity, actual data centers, actual networking, actual cooling, and actual memory supply. That is why I keep saying the most important subtext across the whole week is compute. OpenAI wants richer voice experiences and more agentic workflows. Google wants broader generative search and better multimodal retrieval. Enterprises want more delegated systems. Great. Where exactly do those tokens run? At what latency? At what cost? Under what power constraints? NVIDIA's five-layer cake metaphor in the Genesis mission post: energy, chips, infrastructure, models, applications, is useful because it reverses the usual way consumers think about AI. Most people see the application first, but at industrial scale, the stack starts from the ground up. If energy gets constrained, application dreams get constrained. If deployment speed lags demand, software roadmaps get distorted. So this is not just an energy policy story. It is an AI capacity story. And I think it also helps explain why the big players are moving in such different directions at once. Some are improving defaults. Some are pushing enterprise services. Some are tightening evaluation. Some are expanding ads. Some are pushing infrastructure. They are all attacking different choke points in the same system. I also want to make room for the open model angle because if you only follow giant platform announcements, you can miss the structural pressure coming from open releases. Mistral 3 is a good example of the kind of story still shaping the landscape this week. On its official page, Mistral describes a family that stretches from small dense models at 3 billion, 8 billion, and 14 billion parameters all the way up to Mistral Large 3, a sparse mixture of experts model with 41 billion active and 675 billion total parameters. The company emphasizes Apache 2.0 licensing, multimodal and multilingual capabilities, and deployment paths from edge use cases to enterprise workflows. Why is that relevant in a week dominated by OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, and NVIDIA? Because open models do three jobs in the market. First, they put pricing pressure on closed platforms by giving developers and enterprises another reference point. Second, they enable deployment patterns that are strategically important, including on-prem, in VPC, edge, or custom-tuned environments. Third, they keep reminding buyers that model capability is only one part of the value equation. Control matters. Portability matters. Fine-tuning freedom matters. Latency and privacy lanes matter. So even if the loudest mainstream stories this week came from larger closed ecosystems, the open side is still shaping how the rest of the market behaves. And practically speaking, that open pressure is one reason enterprise buyers have more leverage than they used to. If a closed vendor is too expensive, too rigid, or too slow to customize, there is a stronger alternative set than there was even a year ago. That does not mean open models win every task. It means they are part of the negotiating environment and part of the deployment strategy conversation. In a compute-constrained world, that matters even more because the ability to choose the right-sized model can become a direct cost and security advantage. I want to spend extra time on the voice story because it is very easy to underrate if you still think AI products are mainly about typing. A serious real-time voice stack changes the market in three ways at once. First, it changes how often people use the product. Text assistants still ask a lot from the user. You have to stop, type, structure your request, and often babysit the output. Voice lowers that activation energy. If the assistant can understand you naturally, respond quickly, and keep context while you move, then the number of moments where using AI feels worthwhile increases. That sounds like a convenience detail, but it is actually a usage explosion detail. Second, voice changes where the product can live. A typed assistant is strongest at the desk. A voice assistant can move into the car, the warehouse, the shop floor, the call center, the hospital corridor, the home, and the field service route. That means the interface story becomes a geography story. Third, voice changes what multilingual capability means in practice. Translation that is good enough and fast enough can turn a previously regional product into something much closer to a global layer. That is why OpenAI's translation angle matters so much here. It is not just a cool demo. It is a market expansion lever. Now, there is a flip side. Voice is one of the cleanest examples of why better AI can become more expensive AI. Real-time interaction is demanding. You cannot hide latency inside a long response composition the way you sometimes can with text. Streaming audio in, reasoning over it, handling interruption, possibly calling tools, then producing speech back out fast enough to feel natural is a very different operating burden. So when we talk about voice becoming more central, we should also hear the quiet capital expenditure story underneath it. Somebody has to pay for that smoothness. Somebody has to provision for bursts. Somebody has to optimize model size, routing, and network behavior so the magic feeling survives at scale. This is also one reason I think the voice race will sort the market in interesting ways. Not every company can afford to compete at the highest real-time quality level. Some will specialize. Some will rely on partnerships. Some will target narrower enterprise environments where usage is easier to model. But the companies that can make voice feel smart, fast, and reliable are going to enjoy a huge distribution advantage. So I would not file this under nice to have multimodality. I would file it under interface power. And historically, interface shifts are where platform power often gets reallocated. Another lane I want to slow down on is trust, because the Google and Microsoft stories this week point to something broader than individual features. For the last couple of years, a lot of AI product conversations have treated trust like an after-the-fact question. Build the powerful system first, then ask how to communicate confidence or uncertainty later. That approach does not scale very well once these systems start touching work, research, customer support, or search behavior at mass volume. What Google did this week is interesting because it attacked the problem from both sides. On the developer side, Gemini File Search got multimodal support, custom metadata filtering, and page-level citations. On the user side, AI Mode and AI Overviews got stronger pathways out to the web through direct links, previews, and article suggestions. Put those together and you get a clear product thesis. If people are going to use generated answers more often, they need better ways to inspect the underlying material. That sounds obvious, but it is not how many AI systems have been designed. Too many systems still reward a kind of black box confidence. They sound smooth, and the user has to do extra work to verify anything important. The companies that solve that badly will hit a trust ceiling. The companies that solve it well can unlock more delegation. And that is where the Microsoft evaluation story fits in too. You can think of this as a ladder. Internal evaluation is one rung. External testing is another rung. Grounded retrieval is another rung. Visible citations and accessible source links are another rung. Each rung makes it a little easier for a human being or an organization to say, yes, I will use this for something more important than a toy task. So the biggest insight here is that trust is becoming a user experience discipline. It is about what the product exposes, not only what the model internally knows. If your product can show where an answer came from, why that source was selected, and how to inspect the original context, you are not just reducing hallucination anxiety. You are increasing the number of workflows where the system can be responsibly adopted. That is why I think this lane is going to become even more important than raw benchmark gains in certain markets. The system that feels inspectable often beats the system that merely feels clever. If we pull together the OpenAI B2B Signals story, Anthropic's new services company, Microsoft's frontier firms framing, and NVIDIA plus ServiceNow's enterprise agent stack, we can sketch a pretty good picture of what the enterprise agent playbook is becoming. Step 1 is not full autonomy. Step 1 is scope delegation. Firms begin by finding repetitive, high-volume, painful workflows where the upside is clear and the blast radius is manageable. That might be coding assistance, internal support triage, document routing, compliance prep, or research synthesis. Step 2 is tool and context integration. This is where a lot of projects stall. The model may be good, but if it cannot see the right documents, systems, permissions, and workflow state, the output stays superficial. Step 3 is human review design. This is the part the hype often skips. Valuable agent systems are rarely fire and forget. They tend to be review and release, or review by exception, or escalation on uncertainty. Step 4 is governance. Who owns the agent? Who can change its tools? Who sees the logs? Who audits the actions? Who decides what cannot be automated? And step 5 is cultural adoption. Managers have to know when to ask for delegated work. Workers have to know how to specify and check tasks well, and the organization has to learn where automation is actually useful rather than performative. That may sound less cinematic than the phrase autonomous agents, but it is the difference between a real operating model and a demo reel. This is also why Anthropic services bet makes sense. Many firms do not need a better chatbot. They need help moving through those 5 steps without creating chaos. It is why NVIDIA and ServiceNow talk so much about governance and workflow context. It is why Microsoft's author, editor, director, orchestrator model is useful. And it is why OpenAI's frontier firms data is such a telling signal. The firms getting ahead are likely doing more of this organizational work, not just buying access to smarter models. So if you are trying to understand where enterprise AI goes next, I would watch who gets good at scope delegation with clear oversight. That is probably the real bridge between today's copilots and tomorrow's more autonomous systems. One of the most useful ways to read this week is through business models, because that is where a lot of the real strategy becomes visible. OpenAI's ad story says consumer AI still needs more monetization rails. The B2B signals piece says enterprise AI value is increasingly tied to depth of use, not just broad shallow adoption. Anthropic Services Company says part of the enterprise market may be monetized through implementation and ongoing hands-on support, not merely model access. And the open model lane, represented here by Mistral, keeps a floor under how much control and portability buyers can demand. Those are very different revenue logics. Add scale with attention and intent. Enterprise platforms scale with usage, seats, and integration value. Services scale with deployment friction and customer intimacy. Open models can scale through hosting, support, ecosystem pull, or enterprise packaging around free weights. So what? The important point is that no single business model has fully won the frontier AI market yet. That is why we keep seeing companies attack from multiple angles at once. A vendor may want subscription revenue, enterprise contracts, API usage, and some kind of ecosystem or marketplace layer. But every monetization path creates trade-offs. Ads raise trust questions. Heavy enterprise customization can slow growth scale. Services add operational weight. Open ecosystems may create pricing pressure downstream. This is one reason the market still feels so dynamic. The technical race is intense, but the economic shape of the category is still being negotiated in public. And for builders and buyers, that is actually good news. It means leverage is still available. If you are an enterprise buyer, you can push vendors on price and deployment because alternatives are stronger than they used to be. If you are a product builder, you can design around niche value instead of assuming you have to become the next giant general assistant. And if you are a viewer trying to make sense of weekly news, the lesson is simple. When a company ships a feature, also ask how it expects to get paid for the behavior that feature creates. A lot of the future of the category sits inside that answer. To close the deep dive section, I want to make the compute point as clearly as possible because it is the one theme that binds nearly every major story together. When people hear compute bottleneck, they often imagine a vague shortage headline. But what it really means at the product level is more concrete. It means certain features can feel sluggish when demand spikes. It means certain enterprise deployments become too expensive to scale broadly. It means companies are forced to route traffic, trim context, cap usage, or segment product tiers in ways that users may never fully see. It means some ideas that look brilliant in a launch post get quietly delayed in practice because the operating math does not work yet. Real-time voice is compute-sensitive. Large-scale retrieval over rich multimodal corpora is compute-sensitive. Agent systems that call multiple tools, reason across context, and manage longer sessions are compute sensitive. Search products that generate rich answers for huge audiences are compute sensitive. Now add memory bandwidth, interconnect, networking topology, and power availability, and you start to understand why NVIDIA keeps sounding like an infrastructure company first and an AI company second. This is also why OpenAI's infrastructure build-out story matters beyond one company. It is a clue that the next phase of competition will reward not just model inventiveness, but deployment muscle. And that deployment muscle is expensive. So the correct way to hear a lot of product news now is as a question. Can this company actually afford to let this behavior become normal? If the answer is yes, that is a moat. If the answer is not yet, then the product may still be strategically important, but the rollout path will be bumpier. That does not make the model race less exciting. It makes it more grounded. The companies shaping the next 2 years will be the ones that can turn impressive demos into dependable, economically sustainable habits for huge numbers of people. That is a compute problem, an operations problem, and an energy problem all at once. And it is why infrastructure stories deserve a place right beside the model stories in any serious weekly roundup. So what is the real takeaway from the week once you stop looking at the headlines one by one? For me, it is this. Nearly every exciting AI story in 2026 is now also a compute, memory, networking, or power story in disguise. OpenAI ships better voice models. Great. Now you need low-latency real-time infrastructure. OpenAI improves the default model. Great. Now the mass-market assistant becomes more capable and gets used more often. OpenAI shows frontier firms are pulling away through advanced tools and deeper usage. Great. Now the enterprise market wants more delegated workflows at scale. Google makes retrieval more grounded and search more source-aware. Great. Now users expect better answers and better provenance at the same time. NVIDIA and ServiceNow sell autonomous enterprise agents. Great. Now businesses want governance plus execution plus favorable token economics. NVIDIA talks about energy and 100,000 GPU systems. Great. Now we are back to the physical limits again. This is why I keep pushing back on shallow model ranking discourse. If you only ask which model is smartest, you miss the real system question, which is which company can deliver useful intelligence reliably, safely, and affordably under real-world constraints. That is a much harder contest. It includes business model design, policy design, evaluation, infrastructure partnerships, data center expansion, and sometimes literal energy policy. And that is also why the week feels so rich. These were not isolated feature launches. They were glimpses of a market maturing in public. The consumer layer is maturing. The enterprise layer is maturing. The trust layer is maturing. The infrastructure layer is straining. If you wanted one sentence for the whole week, mine would be this. AI is no longer just getting better, it is getting heavier. Heavier in expectations, heavier in responsibility, heavier in operating cost, and heavier in infrastructure needs. And the companies that navigate that weight best are the ones most likely to define the next phase. That is the week in AI from May 3rd through May 7th, 2026. If I had to tell you what to watch next, it would be 4 things. Number 1, voice. Not because it is flashy, but because it is becoming a real interface layer for serious work. Number 2, enterprise delegation. The most meaningful adoption stories are shifting from prompting to workflow design. Number 3, source visibility. The products that make people trust generated answers more will usually be the ones that make sources easier to inspect, not harder. And number 4, infrastructure. Do not let anybody convince you power, chips, networking, and memory are boring side topics. They are the substrate of the whole market now. If you enjoyed this longer breakdown, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and send it to the one person in your group chat who still thinks this is all just about one chatbot beating another chatbot on a benchmark. And if you want the next mega video to go deeper on one lane, drop a comment with your pick. Do you want a full Enterprise Agents episode, a full voice and real-time stack episode, or a full Compute Crunch episode? Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.